Right, well, welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Wednesday, the 16th of August. I'm Councillor Tony Gillies, the chair of this committee. The meeting is being web-streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push-to-talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of July. Are we all in favour of that? Please show. Yep, that's unanimous. Second item is for apologies for absence.
Apologies for tonight's meeting were received from Councillors Karadia, Lawrence and Mrs Maudis. Their substitutes respectively are Councillors Mistry, Mrs Timms and Rabin. Apologies were also received from Councillor Edwards, no substitute.
Thank you. We move on to declarations of interest. Receive declarations of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors. Non-pecuniary, and I'm going to start with mine first, which is application R23/0096-205 Bilton Road, due to the applicant being a fellow councillor. I have no tendency or inclination that could prevent my impartial consideration of the application or ability to listen to the views of all sides before deciding upon how to vote, meaning that I remain open-minded. Councillor Bill Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's the same as you, really. I'm a fellow councillor, but also the site is within my ward. But I'll have the additional words that you included at the end of your announcement, please.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. R221035. I'm the ward councillor for that area, and what you said earlier, I would definitely agree with.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Garcia.
I'm also a fellow councillor. Well, I suppose we all are, aren't we? Isn't that logged for us all, that we're all fellow councillors?
Okay, you accept that? All you, even my wording as well?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on now to pecuniary interest. Any pecuniary interest? No, otherwise we wouldn't be here, would we? Then notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. All clear. Okay, in that case then we'll move on to item number 4, which is applications for consideration. Now there's going to be a slight change around here because we've got speakers on item number 3. We're going to move that to item number 1 so people aren't sitting in the council chamber for any longer than they need to. But let me first of all read out the rules for speaking. First of all, the planning officer will speak and present the application. The committee will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the officer. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants and then the ward councillor will each be invited to speak. The planning officer can address any material issues arising from speakers' comments and accept questions from councillors. Any ward councillor or councillor who speaks on the application as part of the public speaking process shall leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. The committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted upon. Speakers will have 3 minutes to make their representations. They will be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying planning matters that they have previously put to us for the benefit of the committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought, to the planning authority's attention, i.e. late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to the committee for councillors' deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or councillors will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation is given. And now, in that case, then we'll move on to Christina, who's presenting.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a change of use at Dunchurch Methodist Church, Corston Lane, Dunchurch, and it's to a Montessori nursery. It's for approximately 45 children, aged 6 months to 4 years. There will be 10 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff, and the opening hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I've provided an aerial view of the site here, and you can see that the Methodist Church is in this general area. Oh, sorry, laser pointer is in this general area here. These are some site images. The first one is the site looking from Corston Lane, and the second is from Corston Lane again, but it shows the grassed area that is proposed. The next 2 slides show the site with the right-of-way, and then you can see the junction of Corston Lane and Rugby Road. We then have the existing site plan and the proposed site plan. And you can see from this that the bulk of the changes are to the front and the side of the application site. And that's the... Sorry, let me get the pointer up again. You've got it at work that time. And you've got here the external play area, which was the grass play area. You have some more formalised parking here. And then you have some additional landscaping in this general area. These are existing elevations. There's nothing particular to say about these, but I've included them in case anybody has some questions and we need to go back to them at some point. Proposed elevations here. You can see the main change, or the only change to the building, is this here, which is currently a window, and there's a proposal to change it to a door to allow access to the external play area. You can also see here the proposed front boundary. Initially, this was quite a high fence. We've managed to get that changed to bow-top fencing, which is a more traditional type of fencing for schools. And there are also some internal changes, but they don't need planning permission. So the key issues here: principle of development. Policy GP2 allows development within the boundaries of Dunchurch, which is classed as a main rural settlement. Another relevant policy is GP3, which relates to conversions. Proposals will be supported where they comply with the local plan, with particular consideration being given to the visual impact on the surrounding area and the impact on existing services. These issues are covered later in the presentation. Policy HS3 protects community facilities, and it states that the loss of a community facility will not be permitted unless the applicant has demonstrated that alternative provision is available. And that's been shown because the site was being used by the Baptists, and they've moved into the Baptist Church on Coventry Road in 2022. And the applicant has also confirmed that from 2020 to spring 2022, no other community groups use the building. Design and visual impact. Policies GP3, SDC1 and SDC3 require development to be high quality, inclusive and sustainable design which respects the historic environment and the area that it's generally in. The site is adjacent to Corston Conservation Area, and there are listed buildings nearby, numbers 65 to 68 and 80 to 81 The Heath. As I've already explained, there's only one external alteration to the building. There also includes the provision of an activity area broadly where the grassed area currently is. And then we have boundary treatment, which consists of a 1.8 metre high bow-top dark green powder coat steel fencing, a laurel hedge, and a 600 millimetre high timber knee rail fence at the side boundary with landscaping between the fencing and the knee rail. There is also proposed formalised car parking arrangements. It's considered that subject to details of the door to make sure that it matches the windows as far as possible, with boundary treatment and landscaping, the application is acceptable in terms of its design and visual impact. Access and highway safety. Policy D2 requires the application to have 12 to 13 car parking spaces. It provides 6 including one disabled parking space, which means there's a shortfall of 6 to 7 car parking spaces. Car parking spaces are currently not marked out on site. It's estimated that 4 cars could be parked there at present, and some of those would probably have to be on the grassed area. What we have to do is take into account the previous use, and the previous use as a church under the requirements of policy D2 required 60 spaces. That's based on 5 people sitting on each pew, or 34 spaces based on the floor area. So that means that there's a shortfall of 16 car parking spaces if you base it on the 5 people sitting on a pew, and 30 if you base it on the actual floor area. So that potentially results in fewer cars parking on the street, 6 to 7 for the proposed nursery use, as opposed to between 6 and 30 for the church use, depending on whether you use the floor area or whether you use the pew size. Tricks data, which is a industry standard tool that the County Council use for identifying how many trips a particular use will generate, states that the proposed use will generate about 13 movements in the AM and PM peaks. So looking at the amount of car parking there is on site, that would result in around 7 cars parking on the street. We have to remember that at the moment the existing use for the building is a church, and that could start up again without the need for any planning permission, and there are no restrictions on the number and the time of services or the number of people attending. The proposed access meets the requirements of the local highway authority, subject to conditions relating to gates and enclosure, to the parking and turning area, and to the provision of pedestrian and vehicular visibility displays. The local authority, highway authority, because of the potential reduction in the amount of traffic to the site, has no objection to the impact the change of use will have on the highway network. As a result of a number of the objections that we've had to the application in relation to the impact on highways, we're proposing an additional condition which isn't actually shown on the committee report, that will require the applicant to provide a traffic management plan. And that will include details of how the staggered arrival departure times, which they've referred to in the application document, will work, measures to encourage car sharing and walking to the nursery. Subject to the conditions requested by the local highway authority and the new condition that I've just referred to, the application is considered to be acceptable in terms of the impact it will have on access and highway safety. Of further key issues, impact on neighbouring properties. Policy SDC1 safeguards residential amenity, subject to conditions restricting the hours of operation from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday only, and the submission of a noise assessment. Environmental health have no objection to the application. We've also considered biodiversity, climate change and sustainable design, and the impact on the public right-of-way. All of those issues have been suitably addressed and are detailed in the committee report, and they subject to the relevant conditions as shown outlined in the report and shown on the draft decision notice. There are no issues with those. A number of objectors have made references to other legislation, such as the Highway Code, workplace health and safety and welfare regulations, fire regulations and Ofsted. And whilst they're noted, the planning regime cannot consider issues which are covered by other legislation. So we come to the planning balance. The economic strand, the development is going to provide some employment during conversion and in its ongoing use. In terms of the social strand, the application proposal will not have a significant adverse impact on residents and has the potential to reduce the number of cars parking on the road. It does not cause the loss of a community facility and would create nursery places which are needed in the area, and that's based on information submitted by WCC Early Years. In terms of the environmental strand, the application would not have an adverse impact on biodiversity and results in additional landscaping. The limited changes to the external appearance of the building, plus the proposed boundary treatment and landscaping, means the proposal will not have an adverse impact on visual amenity. So the recommendation is that the conditions and informative set out in the draft decision notice appended to this report, and the additional condition requiring a traffic management, and the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment be given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and informatives outlined in the draft decision notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Christina. Now, do we have any points of clarification for the officer? But only Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I note the number of traffic movements one's expecting at this application site, but what I don't see in here is any information on modal shift, encouraging employees to find different modes of transport to come to work. It's assumed that they will all be coming by car. The other thing, it is that picking up and dropping off is a designated picking up and dropping off area on these plans.
Through you, Chair. The condition that I talked about, which isn't currently on the decision notice, requiring information about a traffic management plan, one of the things that we would look for that to include would be information about encouraging people to car share or walk to the site. So that would be staff as well as members, as parents. So I think that hopefully covers the first one off. And no, there isn't a pick-up and drop-off area on the plans. There isn't room in the site for that. You can see there's just the 6 car parking spaces. Do you want me to go back to that plan?
If there isn't a proper method. I mean, I've got a very large nursery on my patch. I know how much traffic it generates. I know they have to look at when little Johnny's being picked up, when little Mary's going, as part of their traffic management plan for the site. And again, at Lorraine Nurseries, having sensible pick-up and drop-off points would seem to be common sense.
I think the issue with this application is that it's a change of use. The possible use of that existing building. Now, I know from comments that have been made from people who've objected to the application that it was a small use that the Baptist Church had and the Methodist before that. But we can't assume that that is what would happen if another church moved in there. So we know, for example, that there are multi-faith centres and there are spiritual centres which might have a significant increase on the use that's currently in there. And that's the backstop that we are taking it from, and that's why the recommendation is approval, because theoretically the use is potentially, and the number of cars generated and trips generated is less than that could be generated for its use as a church.
Okay, we've got any more points of clarity? Councillor Bill Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks for the report. It's quite good. Just one point. Looking at the plans at home before this evening, it seemed that there might be a second access off the roads. Is that right, or am I wrong? It's just one vehicle access.
It is just one vehicle access. Initially, the 2 accesses were proposed, and there were concerns about that from the local highway authority. So now there's one vehicular access and one separate pedestrian access. Do you want me to go back to the...
No, that's right, if you confirm that. The other thought I had, after having many years of experience being involved with schools, is that they have evening events, like meeting the teachers and so on. So has any of that been taken into account when lots of people would arrive at about the same time?
Yeah, we have a condition limiting the operation to between 8 and 6. So that would be, and that's Monday to Friday, so they can't use it at all at the weekends. And they would be allowed to come in and open up earlier and to have staff meetings afterwards. But there are 10 members of staff who are full-time and 2 part-time members of staff.
So that means they couldn't have any school events after 6 p.m?
No. No, it would just be tidying up. And obviously, if a parent was late, they couldn't just chuck the child out. So, there might be the odd occasion, I suppose, if somebody was 20 minutes late or something. But no, as a general rule of thumb, it would have to be between 8 and 6.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We've got Councillor Srivastava.
Thank you, Chair. You stated there is a need for this kind of facility in the area. Is it substantiated by some data? Some information?
There has been a letter of... Oh, sorry. Did you hear that? There's been a letter of support from Warwickshire County Council Early Years, which is identified in the committee report. They basically say that Rugby Borough has a shortage of early years provision.
Okay, and then we'll move on to the speakers. And first we've got the objector, Mr. Robert Collins. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity, councillors. May I point out the local parish council has objected to this development, and as you say, 29 objections from the local residents living close by it. And after reading the planning document, I think there are a few discrepancies. Noise is for one. To have 45 children having staggered play, outside play, will cause a significant new noise problem to the neighbouring properties throughout the day. The parking, as you've touched on, Highways Agency admits that the council own standards, it's below it. With one parking staff bay and a disabled bay, the 10, 12 staff will obviously park locally anywhere. The document also alludes to the fact that the owner does not need to have more parking as its change of use is in the same class. But this was a church only used really on a Sunday mornings. And they closed it because of the lack of attendance. So this change of use will create a significant new nuisance all week at peak times. Safety-wise, the highway codes, it's do not park near a stall entrance and not within 10 metres of a major junction. There are also side of prevention of accidents. Say schools need to consider how best to authorise and manage access for parents from the school site. The entrance to this building, the site, fails to segregate vehicles and pedestrians in contradiction to the workplace health and safety regulations. Please see case law HSE versus St Andrews Tutorial Services Limited. Also in 2018, Bridgend Council failed to implement parking safety measures and a child was knocked over. The council there was fined £300,000. I see on this plan no health and safety risk presentative measures for all these issues. I think it's a bit dangerous. The traffic in the area, we in Dunchurch know the traffic and the parking problems around the local schools now. The road outside this site is not divided, it's a single carriageway virtually, and as a junction to this busy major A road, parents not able to stop by the school or passing through will park on this A road and will cause a new significant hazard, congestion, nuisance, pollution to an already overburdened road at the peak times. And we know that peak times, the traffic is backed up outside the village. The development will increase traffic flow significantly in this area at the peak times, way over and above what the church originally had, and at peak times. The fire, I can't understand where 45 preschool children will evacuate to, next to this very busy A road, with cars parked everywhere. The planning department seems to have adopted a rosy suck it and see policy to safety, noise, traffic and parking. And please note, the development goes against the council's own policy, GP1.
Ever so sorry, your time is up. Sorry, yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. That's very good, thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next speaker, and we've got Mr. Richard Cook from Marron's Planning.
Okay, yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Speaking on behalf of the applicant, who has 33 years of experience in providing high-quality pre-nursery, preschool nursery places, and is graded an outstanding provider by Ofsted. We welcome the officer's committee report. We think it addresses the key points relevant to the application. Just note that the applicant has worked closely with officers, beginning with pre-application advice request. They've listened to feedback that's been received, amended drawings, and provided additional information as needed. As we've heard, there is quite strong demand for preschool nursery places in the local area. That's only likely to increase with the additional development that's taking place at South West Rugby and locally. Dunchurch is an appropriate location for the proposed nursery. The proposed development will invest in an existing empty building and bring that back into active use. It's not an unusual site in terms of most of Rugby's nursery provision is located within residential areas as an integral part of the community. The applicant operates a similar sized nursery at Vicarage Road in Rugby. where there's no adverse impacts on local amenity or residential amenity, and the site's actually very, very similar to Corston Lane. The officer report considers parking provision against the lawful use of the building, which is, we think that is the appropriate test, and there is an opportunity to provide betterment in terms of the number of vehicles that would potentially be parking on the street. I think the applicant is confident that the number of on-site spaces provided will be sufficient. In their experience, drop-off events occur sort of at staggered periods throughout the day. So in this instance, it would take place between 8 and 10 in the morning, with pickups between 4:45 and 6 o'clock. And of course, vehicles would only really park for a relatively short period of time. In their experience, that period is around about 5 or 6 minutes. So there would only sort of be a fleeting visits and vehicles parking. I think there are opportunities to park on the streets in the local area that can be safe without any sort of impact on highway safety. The local highway authority has carried out a detailed and thorough assessment, as they call it, in their consultation response, and they don't raise any objections to this application on grounds of highway safety, traffic generation, or junction capacity. And so, I suppose, in conclusion...
Thank you very much. Time's up. Thank you, Mr Cook. Right, we'll now move on to the ward councillor, Councillor Deepa Roberts.
Hi, thank you. I'm not going to repeat a lot on the parking, but according to my calculation, if there is 10 members of staff working at any time of the day, and there is only 2 parking allocated to staff and 4 to visitors, and if the staff start taking the visitors parking, that will create a deficit of 8 spaces for the staff, and this will be taken from the residents living in this area who already are struggling. The other concern that has been put to me, and I also am very concerned about that, the number 10 is quoted as the number of staff, but we don't know if these 10 are nursery nurses directly working with the children, or are they, or is it included with admin and all this? So if 45 children are there, 10 some admin and all this, there is a possibility that there will be more staff working there, so that will increase the need for parking. My other concern, and some of the residents, elderly residents, are the dropping and picking up time. It might be scattered, but it will coincide with other traffic, such as people going to work, children going to school, parents dropping to their children in other school in the village, such as Bilton Grange, which, as far as I know, has also increased their numbers in nursery capacity. This area is congested most of the time. On that area, there is the 4 roads, there is several exit and entry, and which will wait for their turn, car will wait, lorries will wait, and it's an absolute nightmare for residents of Dunchurch. So now increasing 45 people, which I don't think will all come from the area, they won't be walking or doing the walking bus, a lot of them will be coming by car, most of them will be coming by car, so that will be a lot of turning at that triangle, which will make it very difficult. That triangle is already very hazardous, and people will have to look at several angles before they cross. I have witnessed it myself. So with this increase in traffic, we might get a lot of accidents. Other concern is about the emission. With all these cars going, traffic will slow down, and the carbon emission, noxious gas emission might not reach the target.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Right. All the speakers have completed their 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask the ward councillors to leave the room, please. Thank you. Right, there was a number of points there raised by our speakers. Are there any points of clarification that need to be addressed by the officer of those points? Councillor Rabin.
Thank you, Chair. The officer mentioned a condition put in place for a traffic management plan, but has there been any discussion around establishing a traffic management order?
Through you, Chair. Sorry, do you mean a traffic regulation order? We can't, that's something that has to be done retrospectively, so it has to be done after the event. But yes, certainly if the relevant conditions were met, that would be something that could be looked at, but it's not something that we can consider at this point, unfortunately.
So can I just ask, so I'm aware that that should be done retrospectively, but it invariably isn't in many examples that I've actually found with schools and educational authorities across different boroughs. Can that be added in to the traffic management plan as a condition?
The traffic regulation order is something that's carried out by the county council. I don't believe that we could do that, but I'm open to comments from colleagues if they think differently.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, through you, Chair. As the Christina mentioned, it is actually obviously done through separate legislation through Warwickshire County Council, and what they do need is an evidence base to then demonstrate that a traffic regulation order would then be required. So, for example, it does sound a bit like horses bolted, but in this case, they would need to have the evidence to demonstrate that there is a issue with highway safety, and then on the back of that, they can then move to put forward in a traffic regulation order.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. The missing condition, has the officer circulated a copy to members?
No, we haven't issued an exact wording, but that is something that we could look at doing.
That's not very good, Chair.
Can we put something together on that while we're answering other questions? Anybody else want to? Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The staggered start and finish time seems to be quite important in relation to controlling stuff. Has anyone indicated how that's going to be enforced? And again, my experience with schools, parents have their own ideas on where and how to park, dropping off and picking up.
No, there's no indication within the application of how that would be enforced. That's the idea behind the condition that we talked about in relation to the traffic management plan.
Got Richard to come back on.
Yeah, and what I am conscious of is that obviously I'm aware in other applications we have had a condition imposed that talks, in addition to like a sort of general traffic management condition, which I know here was talking about dropping off times, picking up times. We've also had another condition which looks at actual monitoring on-street parking, which then helps as part of a planning condition, which can then either go and influence an existing traffic regulation order. So it may be something, again, I'll obviously defer to my legal officer here, is whether we could adapt that as a way of then looking at getting the evidence together for a potential traffic regulation order. So there would be a condition that would monitor it, which could then influence a potential traffic regulation order.
I've been on this committee like a lifetime, and it's very unusual that we're being asked to vote on a condition that we have no sight of, we don't know the full contents of, and members can't agree to then add it to the application.
Yeah, I mean, through you, Chair, obviously this is, I think, in light of obviously recent comments that have come back from interested parties. I mean, obviously what we would say is, you know, as we've done with lots of conditions in the past, is, you know, if members want to clarify some of their areas of concern, we would then be delegated through to the Chief Officer for us to then draft that condition if members felt that obviously, you know, we have the agenda as it stands today. We're suggesting potentially there may be an additional condition imposed in connection with a traffic management plan. Obviously, the details of that, you know, we can then discuss in more. We have, I believe, it's already been discussed, the principle with the applicant, and I'm aware we have on many occasions in the past that then been delegated officers to get the precise wording. But if there's anything members feel they want to make sure that that plan includes, we can ensure that, because a condition would normally just refer to a traffic management plan to address the dropping off and the picking up of children. But if there's particular other issues which there seems to be coming into part of the discussion, we can ensure that that forms part of that, and that will obviously then be reported back to members as part of the minutes of the next committee.
Is that okay for you, Councillor Sanderson? That's a reasonable response. Okay, Councillor Silver-Starber is next.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, a lot of issues have been about the traffic. Initially, Highway Authority was not satisfied, but they got some response and then they were happy at the end. But it's all this depends on what kind of data they have to make the assessment. So I don't know, give some report that what kind of investigation they have made to reach this assessment.
Yeah, the Local Highway Authority have done 3 different responses to the application. At no point have they objected to the principle of the application. What they have objected to is the detail, so in particular detail, because there wasn't sufficient information in relation to the visibilities place for the access. So they've always said the principle of development is acceptable, and that's because they've based it on, TRIX data, which is a national database, and I have got what it stands for, because it's one of those things that I can never remember off the top of my head. There's my highway issues. I've lost it. Sorry, I have lost the exact, what the initials stand for. But basically is a national database that has been used by local authorities and local highway authorities for decades. And it amalgamates together information from all of these different uses all over the UK and Ireland, and then comes out with the information that they are able to base their recommendation on. And that's what they are looking at for this particular application. And it's what they use for most applications.
Just to come back on that, TRIC stands for Trip Rate Information Computer System.
Thank you.
Right, we've got some more speakers. Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the road around it, there's no actual double yellow lines. So if you're going to have a staggered drop off and pick up times, and it's going to be looked into or administered, police can't do anything because there's nothing there. Parking, NSL can't go in around there anywhere because there's nothing there to police. So for me, how can you actually keep an eye on what's going on? And secondly, I think the answers would be, I said, shouldn't this been done before this application come to us to discuss?
A lot of the issues that are things that are covered by different legislation. So, for example, the highway code in relation to where people park, and that's not something that we are allowed to look at as part of the planning regime. The information that we've got was considered to be sufficient as far as the local highway authority were concerned for them to provide a response. They are the statutory consultee on issues such as this. They are the experts on that. If they had required additional information, they would have asked us for it, and we would have been able to ask. If they don't ask for it, it's very difficult for us to then do that, because we need to have some backup from a statutory consultee.
Okay, we've got Councillor Eve Hassel.
Hi. I know that junction particularly well, and it does back up considerably most days between 8 and 9:30. I have a great concern. I really would agree to the planning application if it had yellow lines on those corners. I know from my own ward there is a school on a corner just like that, and we have to get the police there because people literally park off the pavement, on the corners. I really think that it would help because the backup is considerable even without this school there.
Thank you, Chairman, through you. Just really to point out, one of the speakers spoke about the number of staff employed and would there be sufficient car parking spaces. Just by way of reminder, there is no obligation on an employer to provide individual car parking spaces for its employees. So that the number of car parking spaces that are there may be available to employees, may be available to some employees, may be available to some and not others. We don't know at this stage whether a management plan would have a dedicated drop-off bay in those time slots to ease that restriction. I hear what members are saying in terms of WLA lines and traffic regulation. At this point in time, there isn't evidence to suggest on highway safety that that is actually required. The comments from the Highway Authority, who are the experts, the statutory consultee, have no objection to this application, if that helps.
With Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not very comfortable at being asked to vote on. I've actually no objection to the application itself, but clearly there are some issues, and clearly we haven't had all the informatives and the conditions, and I don't feel too comfortable really on voting on something that I don't really have all the information on. I think that there's young children involved here, and I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this is as safe as we can possibly get it. I understand what you're saying about it's not up to the employer to have spaces for the staff, but I do think it's our responsibility to make sure that that is as safe as it possibly can be for the people in Dunchurch and the children that are using that nursery.
Thank you. Councillor Rabin.
Thank you, Chair. The point I was getting to, or trying to get to when I last spoke was exactly the points that were being made by committee colleagues. It's worth clarity as well that WLA lines are not enforceable at all by police. They're only civil enforcement, and police can only be engaged or intervene when there's actually a congested highway and there's actually a blockage of the highway. So we've been talking about 7 to 10 vehicles, additional 7 to 10 vehicles. In reality, parents don't stay 5 or 6 minutes. They stay far longer than that. Congestion, not speed, is the issue with schools, nurseries and colleges in all areas across the borough. I would if the highway safety body has had sufficient concern to recommend a traffic management plan, in my view, we should be reviewing the traffic management plan here and now during this application. So there's no evidence base for us to review. I agree with the other colleagues, and on that basis, I would be inclined to reject this application on the basis of highway safety, traffic and parking issues, and the fact there isn't not a traffic management plan to debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you, just to respond to that, the Highway Authority did not ask for a traffic management plan. That actually came about during discussions in terms of considerations, the well-oiled machine of university on drop-off day of Freshers Week, where you have a time slot to unload your vehicle, 5 minutes or whatever, could this be achieved to alleviate any issues in terms of highway considerations and concerns? This did not come from County Highways.
Could I just make a point there that those children on Freshers Week are 18 years old?
Could I just get you to speak into the microphone?
Sorry. There's a little bit of a disparity there because those people are at Freshers Week are 18, 19, 20 years old, not under 4. But could I just ask one thing before we crack on with this further? Because I get the feeling that most of us are probably in favour of the application. We're just uncomfortable with the parking. Is there any way that we could postpone this until the rest of the information we've asked for is available?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just to respond to that point, the point was not about the age of 4 or 18, it was the number of vehicles through the facility in terms of managing the number of vehicles coming to do drop-offs, not the age of the children. It was the management of the traffic.
You don't get a manage a 4-year-old out the car at the same speed as you can an 18-year-old.
We've got a list of speakers, so we'll just listen to what everybody else has got to say. Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement. I think there's not enough nursery places out there, and obviously we need to try and find somewhere at the moment. I'm uncomfortable for voting something which hasn't got all the information to it, so I propose to defer it until we get all the information, which then we can make a proper decision next time. So I would propose that.
Right, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Being asked to vote for an invisible condition which members have no copy of, have no sight of, and there isn't even an informative to say what we would expect within that management plan. It's not even that. So, sorry, Chair, as it stands, I cannot vote for this.
So, are you not seconding the deferral?
I'm seconding to defer it. Sorry, I thought I'd proposed to defer anyway. So.
We've got a proposer and a seconder for deferral. Have we got any further speakers? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to throw a bit of a spanner in the works here because I think everyone's kind of going off. I think we seem to be stressing quite a bit about school, and obviously this is a nursery, which is different to a school. I'm sitting here actually reminiscing of when my children went to nursery, and there is lots of, staggered drop-offs and pick-up times. I know my wife used to pick the children up at an earlier time, but then there was those that would pick up a bit later. So I do think there is that element, which I do think is a big point about the staggered. It's not like a school that you've got to be there at 8:45 or whatever, And the other thing I'm also remembering from when my children were at school is, and I don't think this is something we can impose, but normally you get, because this is something we should encourage, you normally get like your local pubs and things that help with, you can use the car park. So I'm immediately looking like the Dun Cow is just down the road. I know it's not something we can impose, but I'm just thinking, I would like to think the Dun Cow and this nursery would look at speaking. But it's not far, it's not far. I was just looking at it myself. I'm just saying that I think we should encourage these things. I do get the concerns, I do get it is a junction, but I do think we need to remember it will be staggered. Yeah. So that's
have we got any further speakers? We've got a proposer and a seconder for deferral until we've got probably applicant management. Richard.
No, thank you. I just wanted clarification. At the moment, obviously, what's on the table before us at the moment with a recommender and a seconder is deferral for details of a traffic management plan. Exactly. That's what I'm understanding. And that's to include, I've written down pick-up, drop-off times, on-street parking monitoring, parking space monitoring, dedicated drop-off bays. Are there other matters that members are obviously wanting that to include, so we can ensure that we get that information. Obviously, Duncow parking as well. Councillor Raven, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think I would add to that list traffic restrictions and parking, because invariably parents will be parking on road. It will invariably not be staggered, because most parents will be dropping off before work hours and picking up after work hours unless they're not working. And the Duncow car park is already very heavily congested on most times, most days.
Okay, have we got any further speakers? And we could move to the vote on this. The vote to defer. All those in favour of deferral, please show. Unanimous. Well, that's unanimous. Okay, thank you. We'll now go back to number one item on our agenda. Items for consideration, which is with Lucy. Right, we'll carry on with Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. The second application being brought before the committee this evening is application R22/1035, and this is at Myson House, Railway Terrace in Rugby. As previously outlined, the application had been brought to the committee in June and was deferred for further consultation with the Highway Authority, following queries and requests for further information being sent to myself as case officer. The consultation has been carried out with the Highway Authority with a further response provided, and the report updated to reflect that in the agenda this evening. The proposal is an outline planning application. It is with all matters reserved for the demolition of the existing 6-storey office block and for the construction of 2 6-storey apartment blocks and associated external works and landscaping. The site is located approximately 300 metres west of the Rugby train station and about half a mile northeast of the town centre. Here we have an existing Google Earth satellite view highlighted in yellow. We have the existing building proposed for demolition, and then the existing car parking area that is both ground and then at a first floor area accessed by this ramp. Some site photographs is the existing view from Wood Street. We then have a view from the upper level car park as previously stated towards the existing building, and in the background we can see the redevelopment of the cattle market area. Again, this is the existing building looking towards the town centre. A clearer image from the junction at the corner of Railway Terrace towards the existing building and car park area, and then from Railway Terrace towards the railway line further down in the image. There has been a proposed site plan provided with the application illustrating how the proposal could be accommodated. On the image here we have the dashed outline that shows the outline of the existing building, but as of the matters reserved, this is just indicative to show how the principle could be achieved. Additionally, there were indicative plans for illustrated purposes only to show how the 2 blocks could be provided, but design is a reserved matter of the application. In terms of the key considerations, the application site is located within Rugby Town, which is the main focus for development in the Borough. The application has also been assessed against policy ED1 and the tests included in that. Now, whilst there is a conflict, as no details in regards to mixed use on the site have been provided, the balance has been carried out in terms of material consideration of that could be carried out through both permitted development or via a prior approval, and that the principle of development in this site is considered acceptable. As previously stated, as the application is outlined, layout, scale, appearance, access and landscaping are all reserved at the stage and not for consideration with this application. In terms of residential amenity, there has been a condition provided by Environmental Health looking at the issue of noise, but a full assessment of this would be also carried out at reserved matter stage once the design and other elements are provided. In terms of response to the application, there was one neighbour objection and one letter of support. Moving on to the matter of highways, the exact number of units is not being agreed as part of this application. Based on the indicative, it is aware that there could be a sufficient car parking provision on site. This could be carried out in line with the local plan policies and meets the requirements of this. The provision as outlined in the report is over and above that required by the local plan. There was also issues raised since the last committee in regards to impact on the surrounding area where there is a traffic regulation order. An additional condition is proposed, which is condition 25, to address this matter for on-site monitoring before the development and whilst it would begin. Additionally, in regards to highways, there was the issue regarding impact on the existing road network and any damage that there may be. This is dealt with specifically by the Highways Authority, but there is the informative that links to Section 59 of the Highways Act, which can address this matter if required. Additionally, on site it can be shown that sufficient cycle parking and storage could be provided for the proposed residents of the development, and electric car charging points would be provided with any proposal. And this is also included to be secured by condition. Other key matters as outlined on the slide are also considered suitably addressed, and relevant conditions outlined in the draft decision. Additionally, it is considered in line with our housing mix policies that these matters could also be addressed. As outlined in the report, there was a number of requests made for planning obligations. Those have all been tested against the sale obligations, and those that would be requested subject to the application being approved relate to open space, libraries and education, the Integrated Care Board, and in relation to affordable housing. It's considered that the application, as outlined within the conditions and informatives, can achieve a planning balance with an economic benefit with construction jobs and new residents within this area. The social impact of adding new housing within this area is also considered, as well as any environmental gain being provided on the site through additional landscaping and also through the relevant conditions. Therefore, the application is brought to the committee with the recommendation for approval, subject to the conditions and informatives and completion of a legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Expect any questions to the officer, because no doubt this is the reason why we deferred it from the 21st of June to ask questions. Councillor Mrs Garcia.
Well, I wasn't at that one on the 21st of June, so possibly I'm asking something that's already been asked. But again, it seems odd that we're being asked to vote on something that we don't really have the details of. And you say here that the flat sizes are only indicative and that they're below the standard sizes. So what are we actually voting on? The size of the actual building?
This is the principle of the development, not the actual development or what it will look like, the principle of development on the site.
Well, I got that we weren't voting on the flats, but Okay, so but why have they put in then smaller than national space things and things like that if you're not even voting on it? And do we get a vote when it comes to the actual?
Through you, Chair, reserve matters applications through our scheme of delegation currently do not come before the committee. However, once the application was received by the authority, it would be consulted on, and councillors would have the opportunity to request the application to be brought. In terms of what is shown, I'm outlining that there is the opportunity provided by the applicant, and they have chosen to provide us with indicative what potentially could be provided on site. Because that has been provided to the local authority, in assessing the application, I have made clear to outline in my report that once design came through as part of a reserve matters, I can highlight that there is already these issues, so they would be aware of that going forward. That's why that's included in the report. This evening, the application is brought before the committee to assess the principle. That's the only matter that is brought before in terms of whether the principle of 2 apartment blocks with parking and the external works and landscaping would be considered acceptable. All those other matters are reserved and would be a part of a further application, at which point any matters could be further assessed and amendments made if required.
Councillor Sanderson.
I'm glad that we asked for more information. Thank you, Chair. I'm sure the members heard me, if not the public. But I think it's quite important that we recognise that any large-scale development in that area is going to have an impact on air quality. It is going to have an impact on modal shift in terms of pedestrian, cyclist, bus and car use in that vicinity. And I think that's some of the points that we really wanted to get over. It's a shame we've only got half the story on this on the officers for the officer tonight. That's not her fault. That's the county by not giving us a full 360 of the locality. But it does seem a shame that I was going through this. The rather perverse thing is we're going to give some more money to the health service. Is that to help cure all the people who will have heart conditions and respiratory conditions because they're in a poor air quality zone? I've put that one out there for members to consider. But I think we've made some progress. If there is to be a proper town centre master plan, I hope we can put in further information into that. It's a shame it wasn't ready, as it should have been, for these types of applications.
You've made your point well. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Mystery.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
We'll get the officer to respond to that.
Sorry, just to respond on the points raised by Councillor Sanderson. As outlined in paragraph 15.5 of the report, condition 14 of the draft agenda requires the reserve matters to incorporate measures to improve air quality. As in line with policy HS5 of the local plan, new development has to be air quality neutral and exceed those standards. In terms of modal shift, as outlined in paragraph 8.6, with the table and the various modes of transport, it is forecast that there will be a net reduction in the trips with the proposed use brought before the committee tonight. In terms of the funding for healthcare, this could be for any reason, not just relating to air quality, and I would urge councillors to take into consider that it would be all matters of health that could be provided for. It would not be specific to one thing, and the town centre strategy by Rugby Borough Council has already been adopted.
Councillor Mystery.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, when we do a detailed planning of the blocks, I think many of you uses the railway terrace, that particular junction, to go to railway station, etc. There is a refuge at the middle of the road, just on the edge, just past Wood Street Junction. And if you look at it, that bit on the road, on street, is mostly occupied by megabus and stagecoach, who goes into the service bay for cleaning and servicing, whatever. And best of time, they are blocking that bit of stretch of road outside what is Meissen House. And what we would like to provide, that in consideration be given that in the world we live of delivery vans, whatever, there is a Pacific area where we're not fighting for people who come to the station, people who are delivering, and there's nothing stopping at the moment in a megabus parking stagecoach on that piece of the road, that they provide facility on site for deliveries, yeah, and not to be competing and causing havoc on that particular bit of the roadwork. Thank you, Chair.
We've got Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Just going through the report, there's obviously some details regarding Wood Street, which was better than compared to last time. But what about Craven Road, Murray Road, Newbold Road, Railway Terrace? Because all them roads are going to be affected by this new property. So it feels like we've just picked one road, and you need to look at the whole picture. And I think this needs to be battered back to highways to have a look at this as well for the future, if we're going to approve it tonight and going for development, because I feel that giving us one road is not enough information, and I think that needs to be put as an email to highways regarding this.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just to kind of remind members of the point that what's before you today is an outline application. Clearly, at the point of reserved matters, there'll be further consultation at that point when the numbers, etc., the layout, massing is all known. There will be the further opportunity to consider those things and have highway comments at that point in time. And as the officer has pointed out, that currently reserved matters are delegated to officers. You do get the weekly lists, so it is within your gift to seek to call that application in to committee for consideration at that point.
Thank you for that. I just want to put that on record, really, because I just wanted to make sure it doesn't get forgotten and make sure it's ready for next time we're going to approve for flats and more on that place.
Yeah, through you, Chair. The Highways Authority also will have had to have carried out a full assessment in regards to why there's specific reference to Wood Street. I would point out that that is probably most likely due to that being the one specific street that was outlined in the queries provided by councillors to be provided to the Highways Authority. So that's why our response would be so specific to that one, because that's what was provided to them for their further consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Mystery.
Just a point what I raised. I don't have any objection what's on the front of us today, outline planning permission. Yeah, welcome that. All I'm saying is, going forward, that what I've raised about the delivery vans, etc., that may be provided can the officer give an assurance that that will be taken on board at the next stage, please?
Yes, through you, Chair. Obviously, the parking layout is part of the reserve matters that will need to be considered by us as officers and the Highway Authority at that time. And I think it will, because we've got quite an expanse of parking that will be on the site, obviously we can hear from what you're saying, and obviously that can be something that can be looked at the time, because I don't think the Highway Authority will necessarily want delivery vans parking on the railway terrace area, where I think a lot of it's WL aligned already. If they're making deliveries, they'll want them to come off onto site. And a lot of these developments often have sort of shared communal areas for delivery vans to drop off, like posts and stuff, for these types of, if it's going to be a flat development anyway. So that's where they would then normally park their van in order to then drop the stuff off rather on the highway. But hopefully the applicant will pick up on this anyway, and when the site obviously comes through for the reserve matters and those details, that can be something that can be looked at that time.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just one further point. Condition 12 that's proposed in the outline draft decision before committee tonight requires that before the development can be occupied, it can't be occupied until space has been provided within the site for the parking and manoeuvring of vehicles in accordance with the details that first have to be provided to us. So there would have to be further plans provided for consultation in regards to the manoeuvring of vehicles in relation to the site.
Okay. When Councillor Harrington last spoke, I didn't quite catch what he said right at the end. Did he actually move approval? Did you say that? You said something right at the very end.
No, I didn't.
In that case, then, I was just hearing things.
Chair, I'll move from...
Councillor Ward and Councillor Mrs. Garcia.
I was actually literally just going to say I'd like to move approval. I'd like to move approval, please, because I think I see lots of adequate... I think the space is there. I think there's lots of, like we said, there's parking space. I saw this last time when it came to the committee as well. So I'm happy to move for approval for the outline planning, as discussed.
Mrs. Garcia.
I'm happy to second that.
Interesting to note in the report there's only one letter of objection and one letter of support. But anyway, we've got a proser and a seconder for approval. All those in favour, please show. And believe it or not, that's unanimous. We're on a roll. Right, the next item to consider is 205 Bilton Road, and we've got Callum Mason to present.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application, this is R23/0096 for 205 Bilton Road. This is an application for the demolition of an existing conservatory and garage to erect a single and two-storey side and rear extension with associated external works. So some context of the site. You may be able to see the site is outlined in the red there. It's located within the Rugby and Overslade ward. The property has detached dwellings on either side. The dwelling consists of red facing brickwork with white UPVC window and door openings. The dwelling is a detached two-storey property which has had dormer windows added over time, and there is a detached garage to the side of the property. So here you can see a few pictures from my site visit. Hopefully you'll be able to see all the different angles where the property is being affected. This is basically a 360 coverage of the site. So the proposal details. So there's going to be the demolition of the existing garage and the construction of a new garage in its place. And above that there will be an extension built. There's also the demolition of the existing conservatory and the construction of an extension to expand the dining room. The demolition of an existing sunroom and construction of an extension to expand the lounge, as well as the construction of a 3.5 metre tall boundary wall with gates to access to the garden. And then finally, there's the implementation of 2 zinc dormers to the rear of the property and 3 roof lights to the front. I'll show you on the next slide where all of these are going. So, are you able to see the cursor? No. Well, in the top right-hand corner, you can see the proposed ground floor plans. Hopefully you can see it all right. There are red outlines of the existing building. So hopefully you can see the proposals don't increase the footprint of the property by a significant amount. However, there is some increase in massing, as you will see on the next slide. So you can see from the top the existing elevations and the rear, the bottom. So hopefully you can see a bit of the difference where you can see the increase in massing due to the first or the second story extensions, which kind of increase the bulking a bit, but realistically there's not much of an increase in the footprint of the site. Onto the consultation responses. In terms of technical consultation responses, with Warwickshire County Council Ecology, they requested a bat survey to be done. Once they'd had the bat survey, they raised no objection as they had no issues. Environmental Health, they've had no objection to this application throughout. And then the Environment Agency, they raised no comment. However, their provided matrix was referred to, and that's the advice we've acted upon. In terms of third-party comments, ward councillors and neighbours were notified, but no comments were received. So the key considerations of this application, in terms of the principle of development, it's located in Rugby Town, which is the most sustainable location, and that's the focus of all development. In terms of character and design, the extensions are to be located to the side and rear of the property and aren't going past the principal elevation. The design is considered in keeping with the street scene, and the proposed materials are considered in keeping with the existing property. In terms of ecological considerations, as previously stated, Ecology requested a bat report. Once the report showed no signs of roosting or nesting, Ecology stated they had no objections to the application. With flood risk management, due to the site being located partially in flood zone 3 and 2, we had to look into this. The design incorporates materials to reduce the flood risk, and there are matters also such as incorporating measures in terms of the 1 in 100 flood levels. The finished floor level will be 300 millimetres above the 1 in 100 flood level. So it addresses all the flood risk management concerns. And then in terms of impact on residential amenity, due to the scale of the proposal, there's going to be a relatively limited effect on neighbouring properties. This is because of the separation distance between the properties, meaning there'll be minimal risk of overshadowing, as well as the lack of windows being installed on side elevations, which basically means there won't be any risk of overlooking. In terms of planning balance and recommendation, the site's located in the most sustainable location. The extensions will not have a significant impact on the character and the appearance of the area. The proposals would not have an unduly detrimental impact on the amenities of surrounding properties. The proposals would not have a detrimental impact on ecology, and the development has complied with the local plan and the MPPF. My recommendation is that the planning application be approved subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the draft decision notice appended to this report, and that the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment be given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and informatives outlined in the draft decision notice.
By way of reminder to the committee this evening, this application is actually before you because, as you all know, it is a current councillor, and as part of the transparency and governance arrangements, it must be reported to committee as part of the planning delegation for consideration. So that's why it is here before you today. Obviously, a planning application such as this, with no objections, would be usually at a delegated officer delegation level, but that's why it's here before you today.
Thanks for that, and thanks to Callum for that presentation. Thank you. Have we got any points of clarification? Councillor Mrs Garcia.
I was going to jump on the bandwagon and say, after you've put that so succinctly, could I recommend it for approval, please?
Okay, we got any further speakers? Councillor Mrs... Okay. Okay, so we've got a proposer, Mrs Garcia, and a proposer, Councillor Mrs Heather Timms. Any further speakers? Councillor Bill Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of interest. The officer mentioned flooding, and you might be surprised to know that there's a risk of flooding in that area. But at the moment, the highest flood level is just at the house next door. It's Sowbrook South, which runs under Bilton Road, and sometimes it gets blocked up with debris and so on, and it has been known to flood quite badly. But he's lucky there; he's just high enough to be out of it.
Yeah, I've told you this before, that we have a briefing with officers on Monday afternoon prior to this meeting, and that was exactly the point I raised with Callum, and he told me all about it. So, any more speakers? We've got a proposer and a second for approval. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous.
And it's unanimous again. So far, 100% record. Right, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is advance notice of site visits. I know Richard's got something.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We have 2 requests for committee site visit. The first one is R23/0794 for 62 Lawford Road, Rugby. The proposal is for a change of use of a shop and a dwelling to 13-bed house in multiple occupation. Councillor Mystery has called it to committee on the grounds of parking, noise, disturbance and traffic in particular, as well as antisocial behaviour and bin storage. So that's members want to vote on that one first.
Okay, 62 Lawford Road. I know the area very well. All in favour of a site visit for that? Yeah. Okay, that's pretty well unanimous, yeah.
Thank you. The second one is for R230691. That's at Ashlawn Road to the north of it, where they're currently building 15 substitution of house types. It's been called in by Councillor Lewis on the grounds of residential impact on residential amenity, potential also there for noise disturbance, but primarily because of there being a 3-storey units proposed, and there are bungalows to the rear of the site, so it's primarily on residential amenity grounds.
Okay, we're all okay with that? Well, believe it or not, Bill Lewis voted for that one as well. Okay, we're okay with that. Yeah. Thank you. Right, and is that?
That's it for the terms of site visits, yes, Chair.
We'll move on then to item 6, which is the appeals update.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of Appendix A, quite a few of these appeals I did refer to at the last appeals report because they had been received at the time. Then, in terms of appeals for in Appendix B, which are currently pending appeals, we do have some updates. The first one is the Dunchurch Park Hotel, which was an application for 40 cabins for a period of 18 months. The Planning Inspectorate has allowed this to operate from 18 months from the 31st of July. The Inspector concluded there was harm to the heritage assets on the site and adjacent, but owing to the acute need for asylum seeker accommodation, this public benefit outweighed the heritage harm, so the Inspector allowed the appeal. In terms of 3 Norman Ashman Coppice at Binley Woods, the Inspector has dismissed this appeal on grounds of the harm to the character and appearance of the area from the front and side extensions that were proposed. And also the barn adjacent to Nethercutt Barn at Flecknoe, the Inspectorate has also dismissed this appeal as well on the grounds that they didn't believe it was permitted development and there was insufficient information to determine that the existing structure was capable of being converted into a dwelling without additional new structural elements. The other update I'd like to provide members with is in connection with the Coventry Stadium or Brandon Stadium appeal that is currently pending. As you may be aware, the local planning authority refused that planning permission for the redevelopment of the site for housing, a sports pitch and pavilion. This will be now heard by the planning inspectorate on Tuesday the 19th of September for up to 8 days. It will commence at 10 o'clock. Both the council and the appellant's expert witnesses will give evidence to the planning inspectorate over the course of the inquiry, and they will obviously be cross-examined by legal representatives from both sides. In addition, the Save Coventry Speedway Action Group has been granted Rule 6 status by the Planning Inspectorate, which means they will play an active part throughout proceedings. It is understood they have legal representation themselves, so therefore will input into the inquiry in the same way the council and the appellant will. Councillors and members of the public are welcome to attend the appeal each day and speak at the inspector's discretion. However, the inspector will be setting out a timetable for the event on the 12th of September, basically a week before it commences. That concludes the update. All I was going to add was actually details of that appeal and other appeals are on our website under the relevant planning application reference number. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comprehensive update there. Thank you. Right, item 7 on the agenda is delegated decisions. Noted. Well done. We've got no speakers on this one. Okay, in that case, that concludes the meeting. But I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting very quietly because I think there's problems with the live stream.
And also there is a meeting next door.
Thank you.
Can I just warn people what happened with this? This will be in my car in the heat. When I opened it tonight, still had a drink, squirted out like a jet, and I got a problem with it.
Oh dear.
So I was told that it didn't come off the electronics on the
Well, there's a lesson to be learnt there. Don't fill it to full next time. Okay. Thank you, one and all.